Hello, I'm Andy Scheel, and today we are going to be going over the legislative branch of the federal government, and our first segment is going to be regarding the responsibility of lawmaking. The first of these responsibilities that we will be discussing is the national versus the local needs of Congress. As we know, members of Congress are elected locally. Their constituents are the ones that actually vote them into office. And we'll put constituents right under the word needs on the local versus national teeter-totter, because constituents weigh on both sides. Yes, they are elected officials, elected per a district in, let's say, metropolitan Detroit or the state of Michigan, but they answer to the nation as a whole. So this becomes quite a bit of a quandary for many members of Congress. Take, for instance, in 2008, when we had the crisis with the automotive industry. Members of Congress in Michigan were particularly conflicted on this issue, in that Michigan is very dependent on the auto industry. When the mention of bailing out of General Motors and Chrysler came about, this obviously was very much an issue that members from the Detroit area and even outstate were very much in favor of, regardless of any political affiliation. So members of the Michigan side they wanted that bailout, because locally that would have been very good for their districts and for their constituents and the individuals that would have been voting them or re-electing them into office. However, nationally, there was a great segment of our country that may have affiliations with foreign automakers, or really are disconnected from the auto industry whatsoever. And nationally, there was not near as great of a reception. In fact, there are some people that were downright upset. So when we look at this issue from a national versus local needs perspective, and we use the Michigan auto industry in 2008 as a primary example, you see that obviously if you were a U.S. representative from Michigan or a senator from Michigan, you would be very much in favor of bailing out the automotive industry, even if members of your caucuses and political parties were either mixed on the issue or were against it. Because in the end, the individuals that would vote you into office were the ones being most greatly impacted. And in this case, we wanted to support the U.S. automotive industry, even if you were, regardless if you were a Democrat or a Republican in the state of Michigan. Now we get to the idea as we transfer over into political parties. This is probably a really good segue to do this, because in the United States, we have a two-party system. There is the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Now, there are third parties that have individuals that have been before elected to Congress. We actually have an independent caucusing in the United States Senate, and Senator Joe Lieberman from Connecticut. However, having said that, we have a two-party system that is that have the most members of Congress elected to it. On the Democratic, what political parties do is they are groups that share opinions and values regarding issues. Now, we divide that up between blue and red because typically what they've done, on maps that reflect political campaigns and elections, the blue represents the Democrat and the red represents the Republican. Now, members of Congress must be loyal to their political parties. The issues that come up regarding this are funding and re-election, as well as popular opinion. Take, for instance, the election of 2008. When President Barack Obama was elected, there was a land sweep of Democrats winning elections because of Obama's campaign being successful at the very top. In the 1980s, we saw this with President Reagan and the Republican Party. It goes back and forth typically. But loyalty to your political party is something that members of Congress must adhere to in order to receive the support financially and politically they need to succeed in Congress. And lastly, there are interest groups. Interest groups such as the NRA. There is, another interest group would be things like unions like the UAW, and locally here, the MEA. Interest groups lobby or persuade members regarding issues. And what other interest groups also do is they donate money to campaigns. Typically, interest groups align themselves with members of Congress of certain political parties. They work two and the same. Perhaps a good linking right here would be the National Rifle Association linking themselves to the political party, the National Republican Party. Doing so, they work on Second Amendment rights, supporting the Second Amendment, on the issue of gun control and aligning themselves that way. And what happens is there ends up becoming a direct relationship between these two parties. A financial relationship, a political relationship, and eventually a relationship that results in the power of the National Rifle Association's influence on Congress. So as we wrap this up, the legislative branch, and introducing the legislative branch, the overall theme is lawmaking. That is what the legislative branch in Congress does. There are three major responsibilities of lawmaking. That is taking the needs of the nation and the needs of your local district or state and satisfying the constituents of both. Political parties, are extremely influential in that, in this case, the Democratic and Republican parties, the two largest political parties in our country, have great influence on their members. These members need to be loyal to these parties in order to receive the funding and support to be reelected once again when that time comes. And also interest groups, powerful private interest groups, the NRA, the National Rifle Association being one of them, lobby members of Congress to work on issues and create laws that would support their interests, and they oftentimes link themselves with certain political parties. That is the legislative branch and the responsibility of lawmaking.